Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Paul Edgar. I am the Associate Director of the Clements Center for National Security. Your host for this event, and on behalf of our University President, Jay Hartzell, and the Clements Center Executive Director, Will Bowden, I welcome you to this observation of the one-year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We are grateful that you are here, that you want to help us remember not only what happened 1 year ago, but also remember that the gears of this uniquely brutal war continue to grind. We are fortunate and grateful to have Vice President Mike Pence as our distinguished speaker to remember this anniversary. This event came together pretty quickly, but I hope it's that you've been satisfied with our communication with you and the opportunity to register, and know that our events staff, led by Elizabeth Dowdy, has really moved mountains so that you could be here. Above all, the University of Texas, the Clements Center, and many of our partners across campus are here to educate students. And it's my real pleasure to introduce one of them to you now. Misha Simonovsky is a master's student at the LBJ School of Public Affairs. He's earning a dual master's in global policy studies and Russian and Eastern European studies. He is also enrolled in the Clements Center's Security Studies Portfolio Program, which is where I've been fortunate to get to know him the past few years. Misha is a terrific student, and I'm excited for Misha to graduate and move on because I know he will also make a fantastic policymaker. So Misha will share with you his thoughts on the war and then introduce to you our distinguished guest speaker. Please welcome Misha Simonovsky.
Thank you very much. On behalf of our university's president, Jay Hartzell, who wishes that he could be here today to welcome you and to express his support and solidarity, thank you all for attending this afternoon. We especially want to recognize our many Ukrainian students and scholars here in the front row. J.R. Deshazo, as well as J.R. Deshazo, Dean of the LBJ School for Public Affairs, Adam Klein, Director of the Strauss Center for International Security and Law, Dr. Mary Neuberger, Director of the Center for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies. Professor Neuberger has personally done a great deal to provide refuge and welcome to Ukrainian students and scholars. And Derek Carver, one of our many exceptional Texas veterans who understands the high price of war, having earned the Purple Heart while serving in combat in the U.S. Army. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Misha Simonovsky, and I'm a graduate student here at UT. I'm originally from the Donbas region of Ukraine, which once again became the epicenter of fierce fighting since Russia's full-scale invasion on this very day last year. I don't want to speak for all Ukrainians when I say that before February 24th, I used to harbor feelings of camaraderie towards Russia and honor the positive moments of our shared history, such as the immense sacrifice for victory in World War II. This sentiment was common across eastern Ukraine, especially before Russia launched its annexation of Crimea in 2014 and incited separatism in the Donbas. However, now, after the inadmissible, unforgivable, and unthinkable brutal invasion, there can be no illusions about Putin's Russia. It is destroying the very Ukrainian regions it claims to protect and kills the peoples that it calls compatriots. It has no regard not only for the international law, but for the principles that it purports to represent. Any hope for peaceful coexistence between Russia and Ukraine, as well as for Russia's constructive position on the world stage, has all but disappeared. In this 1 year, Ukraine persevered through the unprecedented invasion that Europe hasn't seen since the end of World War II, was able to liberate over 60% of the territory that Russia invaded since February 24th, and endured its hardest winter under Russia's missile and drone barrages. There is no safe space in Ukraine. Ukraine's resistance inspired Western nations not to take their sovereignty for granted, as well as demonstrated the instrumental role that the United States plays in international affairs. Without global, but mostly American military assistance, financial support, and humanitarian aid, those achievements would be practically impossible, and my homeland would no longer exist. As we pass this milestone, I urge you not to forget about Ukraine and its suffering. And then life will win over death, and light will prevail over darkness. Thank you. And now I'm honored to introduce to you Vice President Mike Pence, who will share his own reflections on this somber anniversary. Vice President Pence, thank you very much for the roles that you play for Ukraine and for joining us today. We're grateful that you chose to remember this day with us here at the University of Texas, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Misha. Thank you for your moving words and the courageous example of your family and your people. Hearing your resolve and your determination today on this dark anniversary, I am more convinced than ever that the day will come when peace is restored to a free and independent Ukraine. God bless you. And I thank you all for being here. I thank the hospitality of the Clements Center for National Security here at the University of Texas. It's good to be with you all. The Clements Center is one of America's premier institutions, raising up the next generation of our national security leaders. And we're grateful for your leadership, to Dean and the whole team that are here. I especially want to thank Lieutenant Colonel Paul Edgar for his hospitality, and Dr. William Inbud, who is in Washington, D.C. today, celebrating the anniversary of an extraordinary American accomplishment with former President George W. Bush in PEPFAR. But we thank him for his hospitality as well. We are here today to mark the one-year anniversary of Russia's unprovoked and unconscionable invasion of Ukraine. 1 year ago today, Russian forces launched an unprovoked war of aggression against Ukraine. And over the past year, the world has witnessed a tragedy of enormous proportions unfolding in real time. Over the past 365 days, more than 300,000 have been killed or wounded in this conflict. Millions more have fled their homes and their country. And as my wife and I witnessed firsthand, tens of thousands of women and children of every age surged across the border with all that they could carry of their worldly possessions to escape the ravages of war. It's human suffering on a scale not seen in Europe since World War II. In the face of Russian aggression, the world has witnessed the incredible strength and resilience of the Ukrainian people. A noble people with their own language, customs, history, and borders. A people who are fighting courageously, with their backs against the wall, unwavering in their struggle for freedom. The people of Ukraine have inspired the free world. As Misha told us, Ukraine has persevered through this unprecedented and unprovoked invasion and liberated over 60% of the territory that Russia invaded since February 24th of last year. It's been extraordinary. Beyond the courage of the Ukrainian people, we've also seen free nations of the world unite to stand with the Ukrainian people and stand up to Russian aggression. With the leadership of the United States of America, as the leader of the free world, more than 50 countries, from the Indo-Pacific to Europe to North America, are now providing vital military aid to support Ukraine, and we will not stop providing it until victory is achieved. There's one person to blame for the unfolding tragedy of Russian aggression in Ukraine, and that's Vladimir Putin. While some in my party have taken a somewhat different view, let me be clear. There can be no room in the leadership of the Republican Party for apologists for Putin. There can only be room for champions of freedom. During the 2016 campaign, I called Vladimir Putin the small and bullying leader of Russia. And over the past year, the world has seen Putin reveal his true nature. A dictator, consumed by a lust for conquest, willing to sacrifice untold blood and treasure to further his delusions of reestablishing some greater Russian empire. So the world has been inspired by the Ukrainian people. The free world's been inspired to stand by them. And the world now better understands the truth of Putin and his ambitions. But also over the past 365 days, we've been reminded that elections have consequences, not just here at home, but around the world. While Putin alone is to blame for the unprovoked war against the Ukrainian people, I think it's important to remember that during the Trump-Pence administration, Vladimir Putin never attempted to redraw international lines by force. In fact, ours is the only administration in the 21st century where Russia did not redraw international lines by force. It happened under the Bush administration in Georgia, where Russian tanks still exist. It happened in Crimea under the Obama administration. And today we see the carnage and the brutality taking place in Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I believe that history teaches that weakness arouses evil. And let me say to my fellow Americans present that after this administration's disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, the capitulation on Nord Stream 2, America's standing on the world stage was diminished. Our enemies have been emboldened, and they are testing us, from Eastern Europe to the Asia Pacific. So on this dark anniversary, I think it's important for us to learn the lessons of history and be certain in our time that we will put them into practice. Our 40th president, Ronald Reagan, in 1985, articulated what came to be known as the Reagan Doctrine. It was a policy that would not only see to the security of the United States, but it set into motion forces that would see the collapse of the Soviet Union itself. President Reagan, in his State of the Union address in the year 1985, said these words, quote, "We must not break faith with those who are risking their lives to defy Soviet-supported aggression." And under that administration and succeeding administrations in both parties, we took the policy that if you were willing to fight America's enemies on your soil, America would provide you with the means to do it, so that we wouldn't have to fight them on ours. It was true then. It changed the course of history. It's equally true today. Today, our highest goal for Ukraine must be the restoration of peace as quickly as possible. And I submit to you, the fastest path to peace is to help Ukraine win the war. Because peace comes through strength. We cannot surrender to Russian aggression in the vain hope that peace will follow. We must provide Ukraine with the strength needed to win the peace for their people. Sadly, for much of the past year, unlike our administration that provided Javelin anti-tank missiles and other arms to Ukraine, this administration has been hesitant in leadership. Even after the initiation of hostilities, the Biden administration was repeatedly slow in providing Ukraine critical weapons systems like missiles and tanks, only later to relent under public pressure. History teaches that he who hesitates is lost. The truth is, every time this administration has hesitated, Russia has seized the opportunity to regroup, to dig in deeper, ensuring that the war will be longer, costlier, and deadlier than it has to be. Make no mistake, this is not America's war. But if we falter in our commitment to providing the support to the people of Ukraine to defend their freedom, our sons and daughters may soon be called upon to defend ours. If we surrender to the siren song of those in this country who argue that America has no interest in freedom's cause, history teaches we may soon send our own into harm's way to defend our freedom and the freedom of nations in our alliance. It would be foolish to think that Putin's tanks will stop at Ukraine's western border. I believe if Russia is not stopped in Ukraine, the day will come when NATO allies are directly threatened. And in that moment, America will have no choice but to send our own. In times of great peril, the free nations of the world have always been motivated to take action, and so we have in this moment. But so we must continue. First, America and our allies must continue with increased speed to impose sanctions and inflict maximum financial pain on Putin, his oligarchs, his government officials, and his economy until he relents and withdraws from Ukraine. Secondly, the free world must continue with increased urgency to provide military equipment to the courageous soldiers in Ukraine, fighting at this very hour to defend their sovereignty and their freedom. This week, President Biden said in Poland that, quote, Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia. But to ensure this, we must accelerate the pace of military provisions to Ukraine. It was in January of this year that the Biden administration announced that 31 Abrams tanks would be provided to the Ukrainian military. But this week, the Secretary of the Army said that it could take up to a year and a half until those tanks were delivered. That's not good enough. Time is of the essence. We need to provide tanks and resources in months, not years, to the people of Ukraine so they can defend their country. And finally, we cannot overlook the critical importance of continuing to provide humanitarian aid to people that are suffering in Ukraine. Nearly 40 million civilians remain in Ukraine. And as Putin continues his brutal effort to deprive the civilian population of basic subsistence, of electricity, we need to ensure that the people of Ukraine have the ability to survive. if he cuts off supply lines with his mendacious violence, as I said many months ago, the United States and the free world should be prepared to combat Putin's efforts to isolate the civilian population in Ukraine with a 21st century Berlin airlift. We must ensure that the people of Ukraine have access to food and water and medicine to survive and fight to the end. As I mentioned moments ago, last year, a few short weeks after the initiation of hostilities by the Russian military into Ukraine, my wife and I had the opportunity to travel into Ukraine. We had landed in Poland along the border, expecting simply to encourage some Christian relief workers that were assisting refugees. And then we were told that we'd been cleared to go in, and our small convoy made its way across the border, traveling a few short miles to a refugee center there. It was there, as I said, that we witnessed the heartbreaking sight of women and children fleeing their homeland to escape the brutality of the Russian invasion. We traveled to Krakowec, Ukraine, just inside the border. Seeing the desperation on the faces of those families will never leave me. We stood in the cold as people were making their way to the refugee building. We spoke to them. We heard their fear. We heard their anger. We tried to speak gently to the children, to encourage them that they were not alone. I remember looking in the face of a little girl, clinging to a smudged and tattered toy that she carried all the long journey from home. She was scared, confused, visibly traumatized. It was a small glimpse of the violence being perpetrated against the people of Ukraine. But it's one we should never forget. I know these are challenging times in our country. Inflation at a record high, the worst border crisis in American history. Gasoline prices through the roof, crime plaguing many of our major cities. But we cannot allow failures at home to undermine our will to be the leader of the free world. America cannot shrink from the fight for freedom. The American people are reclaiming our security and prosperity here at home. With the advent of a new Republican majority in Congress, and soon and very soon, I believe the American people will rally behind renewed leadership at the highest level. But in this moment, we need to stand together as Americans and understand what we owe history. So to my fellow Americans, to our Ukrainian friends who are here, let us not grow weary in well-doing, knowing full well, as the Bible tells us, that we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. We must continue to stand with the people of Ukraine against the violence and aggression of the Russian military. We must continue to stand together and win a victory for freedom, for ourselves and our posterity. And I would admonish each one of you to do one more thing, if you're of a mind. And that is to pray for Ukraine. Pray for all the brave fighters in this country. Pray for the vulnerable families, as Misha told us, who are still locked in a place where there is no safe place. Pray for all of those in surrounding countries that are caring for families that have fled. And pray for peace in Ukraine, in our own nation, and in the world. And to Misha and the Ukrainian students here, and to my fellow Americans, never forget. The light does shine in the darkness, and the darkness cannot overcome it. We will not forget your struggle for freedom. And I believe the American people will stand with you until the light dawns on a victory for freedom in Ukraine and in Europe and for all the world. So help us God. Thank you all very much. God bless you all.